and there are moments in life when pain feels so relentless that people begin to question not only their future, but their value. After enough disappointment, the human mind naturally starts searching for meaning. That is one of the deepest psychological needs. We all carry the need to believe our suffering is not pointless. When hardship continues longer than expected, many people quietly arrive at a dangerous conclusion. Maybe this is all my life will ever be. And once a person accepts that internally, the struggle becomes heavier than the actual circumstances themselves. But one of the greatest truths you must understand is this: God never wastes pain. What feels like destruction is often construction happening beneath the surface. The difficulty is that transformation rarely feels positive while it is taking place. In fact, most growth initially feels like loss. It feels like confusion. It feels like pressure. And because human beings are naturally attached to comfort, we often interpret disruption as evidence that something has gone wrong, when in reality something deeper may finally be going right. The truth is, some lessons cannot be learned in seasons of ease. Patience is not developed when everything arrives on time. Strength is not developed when life remains comfortable. Wisdom is not formed when every desire is instantly fulfilled. There are dimensions of emotional maturity and spiritual understanding that only emerge through adversity. That does not mean God enjoys your suffering. It means He understands the potential hidden inside it better than you do. Many people pray for purpose, but they resist the process that prepares them for it. They ask God for greater influence, greater peace, greater opportunities, yet become discouraged when life suddenly becomes difficult. But what if the pressure is not punishment? What if it is preparation? A person who has never faced disappointment often lacks the depth necessary to handle responsibility. A person who has never experienced weakness may struggle to show compassion. And a person who has never endured hardship often builds their identity on fragile things that collapse the moment life becomes uncertain. This is why difficult seasons have a way of exposing what is unstable inside us. Pain reveals attachments we did not know controlled us. It reveals fears we buried beneath distractions. It reveals how much of our confidence depended on circumstances instead of conviction. Hardship strips away illusions. And while that process is uncomfortable, it is also deeply necessary because truth is what makes transformation possible. There is also something psychologically important about surviving pain. When a person endures suffering and realizes they are still standing, something changes internally. Resilience begins to form. Perspective deepens. Superficial priorities lose their grip. You start understanding that your identity cannot be based entirely on external success because external things, INGs, can disappear overnight. That realization, while painful, creates a stronger foundation for life. Some of you listening have spent months, maybe years, asking God why your season became so difficult, why the relationship failed, why the opportunity disappeared, why the waiting lasted so long, why the burden became so heavy. But sometimes the better question is not pop. Sometimes the better question is, what is this producing inside me? Because there are qualities being formed in you right now that comfort could never produce. Discipline, discernment, endurance, humility, dependence on God rather than dependence on appearances. And although you may not fully understand this season while you are living through it, one day you may realize the struggle developed the exact strength you needed for the life ahead of you. The human tendency is to judge a season while standing in the middle of it. But wisdom often comes from looking backward. Many people eventually discover that the very season they prayed would end immediately became the season that changed them permanently. Not because the pain itself was good, but because God refused to allow the pain to be meaningless. And that is the hope you must hold on to tonight. Your suffering is not the final chapter of your story. This difficult season is not evidence that God has forgotten you. It may be evidence that He is shaping you more carefully than you realize. The pressure did not come to destroy your future. It came to prepare your spirit for what your future requires. Sometimes the breaking point becomes the turning point. One of the most subtle dangers of a difficult season is not the pain itself, but the identity that pain can create if you are not careful. Human beings are deeply shaped by repetition. What you experience repeatedly, you eventually begin to expect. And what you expect long enough, you often begin to believe you deserve. That is why prolonged disappointment can quietly resha. The way a person sees themselves. After enough setbacks, some people stop saying, "I'm going through a hard time," and begin saying, "I am a failure." There is a profound difference between experiencing struggle and becoming emotionally defined by it. This is where many people unknowingly become trapped. They survive the external hardship, but internally they surrender to hopelessness. They allow temporary suffering to become a permanent identity. And once that happens, even when opportunities appear, they struggle to recognize them because their mindset has already adjusted to defeat. Psychologically, the mind always searches for consistency. If someone believes they are destined for disappointment, they unconsciously interpret life through that lens. Every delay feels personal. Every closed door feels permanent. Every silence feels like rejection. But God never intended your pain to become your identity. The difficult season may have wounded you, but it was never supposed to define you. You are not your heartbreak. You are not your failure. You are not the betrayal, the rejection, the financial struggle, or the season of waiting. Those are experiences you pass through, but they are not the final definition of who you are. And one of the most important spiritual shifts a person can make is learning to separate their identity from their circumstances. Because the moment your identity becomes attached to suffering, hope begins to disappear. You stop expecting change. You stop praying with confidence. You stop preparing for better days because disappointment has convinced you that nothing will improve. This is why some people remain emotionally trapped even after their situation changes. The environment may improve, but the mindset remains wounded. And this is exactly why internal transformation matters so deeply. Before God changes many external situations, He often begins by changing the way a person thinks. Not because thoughts alone control reality, but because mindset determines perception, expectation, and behavior. A person who constantly anticipates defeat approaches life differently than someone who believes restoration is possible. Fear creates hesitation. Hopelessness creates passivity. But faith creates movement. Notice throughout life how often change begins invisibly before it becomes visible. Long before a tree produces fruit, its roots are developing underground where nobody can see them. In the same way, your season often starts changing internally before external evidence appears. The first sign of transformation is not always a new opportunity. Sometimes it is a renewed spirit, a new perspective, a refusal to remain emotionally imprisoned by the past. This is why guarding your inner dialogue is so important during difficult seasons. What you repeatedly tell yourself eventually shapes the emotional atmosphere you live in. If your thoughts are filled with defeat, bitterness, and despair, your energy begins collapsing inward. But when you begin speaking with expectation, even before circumstances improve, something powerful starts happening psychologically and spiritually. Your mind becomes open to possibility again. Your spirit regains endurance. Your emotional world begins recovering from the paralysis of disappointment. Now that does not mean pretending pain never happened. Real faith is not denial. It is not ignoring grief or acting as though suffering does not affect you. Genuine faith acknowledges the reality of hardship while refusing to surrender to it permanently. It says, "This season hurt me, but it will not define me. This struggle challenged me, but it will not own my future." And perhaps this is where many people need healing the most. Not merely from the events they endured, but from the identity those events tried to create inside them. Because when pain lasts long enough, people often begin shrinking their expectations to protect themselves from further disappointment. They stop dreaming boldly. They stop trusting deeply. They stop believing life can become meaningful again. But God did not create you to permanently live in survival mode. There comes a moment when you must decide that your future will no longer be dictated by your wounds, that your pain may have shaped part of your story, but it will not control the ending. And when that shift begins internally, your season has already started changing, even if the evidence has not fully appeared yet. The day you stop identifying with your suffering is often the day your restoration truly begins. One of the most difficult realities for human beings to accept is that not every closed door is a tragedy. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes it is redirection. And sometimes the very thing you were begging God to preserve was the exact thing preventing you from stepping into the next season of your life. But emotionally, This is hard for people to understand because we naturally become attached to familiarity. Even painful situations can become psychologically comfortable simply because they are known. Human beings often prefer predictable pain over uncertain change. That is why many people struggle when God begins removing things from their lives. A relationship ends, a plan collapses, an opportunity disappears, a season of silence arrives. And the immediate assumption is that life is falling apart. But what if things are not falling apart? What if they are being rearranged? You see, we tend to judge situations based on immediate emotional impact rather than long-term purpose. If something hurts us, we label it bad. If something delays us, we label it unfair. But wisdom requires a larger perspective. There are moments when God sees dangers, limitations, and future consequences that you cannot yet see from your current position. And because He sees further ahead than you do, His decisions will not always make immediate emotional sense. One of the great frustrations of life is that clarity comes before obedience. Most people want complete understanding before they trust God's direction. But faith has always required movement before explanation. This is why transitions feel so uncomfortable. You are leaving one season before fully understanding the next one. You are standing in uncertainty while your old sense of stability disappears. Psychologically, uncertainty creates anxiety because the human mind craves control. We want guarantees. We want predictable outcomes. We want reassurance that every step will succeed before we take it. But growth often requires surrendering the illusion of control. And that surrender can feel deeply unsettling because it forces you to depend on something greater than your own plans. Many people are emotionally exhausted not simply because life changed, but because they keep fighting the transition. They spend all their energy trying to reopen doors God already closed. They replay old conversations, revisit old disappointments, and clinch to old identities because accepting change feels too painful. But there comes a point where maturity requires recognizing that some things ended because they could not continue into your future. Not every relationship was assigned to your destiny. Not every opportunity was meant to last forever. Some people were seasonal. Some environments were temporary. Some ambitions were too small for where God is leading you. And although losing those things may hurt deeply, loss is not always evidence of failure. Sometimes it is evidence of movement. This is important because people often confuse delay with denial. They assume that if life is not unfolding according to their timeline, then God must be absent. But there are moments when divine timing protects you from entering situations before you are prepared emotionally, spiritually, or mentally. A blessing entered too early can become a burden. Responsibility without maturity often creates destruction instead of fulfillment. And this is why transition seasons feel so disorienting. You are no longer who you used to be, but you have not fully become who you are meant to become. The old season no longer fits, yet the new season has not completely arrived. That space in between can feel lonely, confusing, unstable. But it is often in that exact space where the deepest transformation occurs. Because transition forces self-examination. It forces dependence on God rather than dependence on routines, people, or external certainty. It strips away false security and teaches you to anchor your identity in something more permanent than circumstances. And perhaps this is what some of you need to understand tonight. Your life is not ending because certain doors closed. Your story is not over because certain plans failed. Sometimes the interruption is the direction. Sometimes the detour becomes the path that leads you to purpose. And many times what feels like rejection now will later reveal itself as protection you could not recognize at the time. There are seasons when God will intentionally disturb your comfort because comfort is no longer helping you grow. He will loosen your grip on things you thought you needed because He knows they cannot sustain the future He has prepared for you. And one day, you may thank God for the door that did not open, the relationship that did not last, and the season that forced you to change direction. Because not every ending is punishment. Some endings are preparation for a greater beginning. One of the greatest misunderstandings people have about a new season is believing that change is only external. They imagine that when God shifts their life, the primary evidence will be visible blessings, new opportunities, restored relationships, financial breakthroughs, open doors. And while those things may certainly come, the deeper transformation is usually internal. Because God is not only interested in changing your circumstances, He is interested in changing you. The truth is, your next season will require a version of you that your previous season could not produce. There are attitudes, fears, emotional habits, and patterns of thinking that cannot travel with you into what God is preparing. Not because God is punishing you, but because certain mindsets are incompatible with growth. A person cannot walk confidently into a new future while remaining chained to the insecurity of the past. And this is where many people struggle. They pray for elevation while resisting transformation. They want a different life without becoming a different person. But maturity does not happen automatically with time. A person can age without growing. Real growth happens when someone allows adversity, reflection, and truth to reshape the way they live and think. You see, every season of life teaches something. The question is whether you are willing to learn it. Pain can either deepen wisdom or deepen bitterness. Waiting can either strengthen patience or strengthen frustration. Disappointment can either produce humility or produce resentment. Two people can walk through the same hardship and emerge completely different internally because suffering alone does not transform people. Response does. Psychologically, human beings tend to return to familiar emotional patterns even when those patterns are unhealthy. Fear becomes familiar. Self-doubt becomes familiar. Overthinking becomes familiar. And after enough disappointment, some people begin approaching every new opportunity expecting failure before it even begins. They carry the emotional residue of old seasons into new ones. As a result, they sabotage blessings they once prayed for because internally they still feel unworthy, unsafe, or afraid. But God often uses difficult seasons to expose these deeper internal struggles, not to shame you, but to free you from them. Because imagine entering a new season with the same fear that controlled your previous one. Imagine receiving greater opportunities while, still lacking the confidence to walk through them. Imagine stepping into answered prayers while emotionally remaining trapped in survival mode. The blessing would arrive, but your mindset would still be imprisoned by the past. This is why internal healing matters so deeply, not superficial positivity, not pretending everything is fine, real healing. The kind that forces you to confront the wounds, fears, and distorted beliefs you develop during painful seasons. The kind that teaches you how to trust God again after disappointment. The kind that rebuilds your ability to hope again after loss. And perhaps one of the clearest signs that your season is changing is this. You begin thinking differently. You stop reacting emotionally to everything that once controlled you. You become more discerning about who and what has access to your life. You stop chasing validation from people who cannot define your worth. You stop panicking every time uncertainty appears because you have survived enough to understand that temporary discomfort does not mean permanent destruction. That is growth. Growth is not becoming perfect. Growth is becoming stable. It is learning how to remain grounded even while life is shifting around you. It is developing emotional discipline instead of being ruled by impulse and fear. It is understanding that peace is not the absence of problems, but the presence of trust in the middle of them. And often before God changes your environment, He strengthens your capacity. Because sustaining a blessing requires maturity. Many people are prepared to receive something temporarily, but not prepared to steward it long term. Character is what allows you to carry what God gives you without being destroyed by it. This is why your difficult season was not meaningless. It was developing strength you did not know you needed. Quietly, beneath the frustration and uncertainty, God was building endurance, wisdom, discernment, and resilience. He was preparing your for responsibilities your old self could not have handled. And now, as your season begins to change, you must make a decision. Do not step into your future carrying the emotional chains of your past. Let the old fears go. Let the old bitterness go. Let the old identity go. The next chapter of your life deserves a healed, strengthened, and transformed version of you. Because God is not just bringing you out of a hard season. He is bringing you into a stronger one.